Uh, So this is a regular meeting of the Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers of the Town of Nantucket. I'm Peter Halley, the chairman. Let's establish whether we have a quorum or not first, and then we'll go on to the go work down our agenda. I must confess that we have had this flurry of new appointees, and I'm not sure who's been sworn in and who has not been sworn in. And therefore, well, I just heard, I guess Gary say we have a quorum. We need to sort of figure out how many members we have in order to figure out what our quorum is.
You know, Peter, while you were gone, nobody else has been sworn in yet. So it's
so it's still just the original members,
Yeah.
or not original, but the current members. Yeah. Okay. So then I think we do have a quorum because we have,
We have
5
5.
noses. Yeah.
Yeah, we have 5.
Okay. So we have a quorum, and in case, let me just, this is a virtual meeting. It's permitted by the rules and regulations of the state of Massachusetts and the town. We'll conduct ourselves like any other committee of the town, in that as we go through the agenda, the members of the committee will make comments first, and then we'll open up to public comment. We have this new hybrid people who have been sort of vetted, but yet not sworn in. So I think that's most of the people that are online that are not current committee members. And we look forward to hearing from you whether or not you've been sworn in. And so we'll position ourselves to go that way. Remember, this is being recorded. And therefore things can be seen by the public and probably in posterity that could be in the background of your pictures or what have you. And anybody who needs to turn their video off is welcome to do so, although I really appreciate seeing people's faces as we sort of normalize our relationships in a virtual setting. So the first order of business, having established that there is a quorum, is the approval of the agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move it.
Yeah, a second.
Second.
Everybody favors?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? The ayes have it. The minutes of the last meeting, which was the December 3rd meeting, do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Also move as well.
Okay, there's a motion and a second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? I don't hear any, so the ayes have it. Welcome to new members if applicable. I guess the welcome, let's see, I think we welcomed Donna the last time around, and she is a sworn in new member. Is that correct, Donna? Yeah, okay, you're on mute, but Pamela, have you been sworn in yet? No. Anybody else been sworn in? No. Okay, so who remains to be interviewed of anybody on? So Gene?
I've not been interviewed. I'm scheduled for some time in the next couple of weeks, I think.
Okay, good. And Ralph, have you been interviewed yet? You've been interviewed, so it's just a matter of swearing in. Are they doing the swearing in virtually nowadays?
No.
No.
Yes,
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I think it depends.
It depends. So probably depends on convenience.
So Peter, it's interesting because there's a clerk in the office this week because a few people are away, and
Yeah.
she adamantly said no.
Right.
But when Libby Gibson interviewed me, she asked me when I'd be back on the island, and I said probably February. oh, we can probably get you sworn in virtually before then. So I'll probably reach out to Libby to see if there's any wiggle room.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing. There's strength in our numbers. We've had a lot of, Pamela, we've got a lot of criticism over the last year or so of being so few. And so how can we be so representative? And
Right.
well, we are limited, I think, to 15 total. We're starting to have a better geographic dispersion and all the rest of it. So, and most of us have been on the island some time. So I think we are somewhat representative of not every single non-voting resident, but probably a good cross-section. So welcome to all the newly vetted, but not necessarily sworn in members. We look forward to you being sworn in as soon as possible. I'll mention to Libby as well that we're looking, if possible, getting people sworn in virtually would be a great help. I think I saw town council in another virtual meeting say that that was okay. So I don't know what the problem is. I think there are also a number of papers. Have all of you gotten the conflict of interest papers and things of that nature that need to be filled out and what have you? It's we're a committee that actually has just an advisory duty. We can't really approve or disapprove of anything in any way other than through our advice, but still we are governed by all the conflict rules. So I guess that's like a belt and suspenders operation. Okay, so we've got our member count. We welcome you. The discussion of the STR working group meetings is next up. I think there's been one meeting since our last meeting, and the next one is planned for February, is it?
No, I think it's the end of the month.
The end of the
31st.
month.
31st.
Hearing Peter Kahn's voice, maybe you'd like to discuss that.
All right, let me see. There we go. Whoops, what happened to my picture there? Hold on. There we go. Sorry about that. Good morning. Kathy probably knows it more than I do, but I mean, we originally had a meeting scheduled, I believe, for actually this Tuesday, but that's been pushed back now to 2 weeks from that. So I guess it went January 31st. The one thing that was recently circulated that I think we should circulate to this group is something that probably should have been circulated long ago, which was what they're calling key data questions. You know, many of us have been complaining to them that, you know, until we define the problem, we don't know what it is we're asking for. But they put together a list apparently of what they think are the summary of key data questions. I'm not sure it's complete by any sense of the word. So I think we ought to be looking at this and talking about it. And I gather we're going to meet as a group again. I don't know, possibly in 2 weeks if we can, you know, get some comments on this before the next meeting of the SDR group. That would be helpful. So maybe Kathy, you could circulate that to this group. Other than that, we had a meeting. The last meeting I recall was the meeting, I think it was December 12th, correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy, but it was a meeting where we met virtually with members of the community to hear their views, their concerns. I must say, from my perspective, and it's just my own perspective on this, it was almost, I mean, it was quite incredible. It was almost universal. We broke into several small groups, and within those groups, there were maybe 5 people, locals, and maybe some of you were attended or saw this, but it was almost universal, a feeling that, hey, you know, we have had the STRs on Nantucket forever. We, the people speaking, and almost to a person, have had these in our family. We have used these. These provide, you know, us an opportunity to continue to maintain our homes on the island. We don't rent year round. We can't. You know, we want to live. We want to be in our house, but we need some additional income to maintain the home, and we do this regularly. And again, these are generalities, but it's, almost to a person. We haven't had many issues. We rarely have noise issues, et cetera, et cetera. There also was a general, when asked specifically, are you concerned about quote unquote corporate or big box companies coming in who do this exclusively? The answer was yes, although the reasons for that were a bit vague in the sense of, well, it's not Nantucket, it doesn't feel right, basically, but there were no specifics because, I try to press the issue, for example, in my groups, how do you distinguish the Copley group from those? And it was not well articulated. But in any event, bottom line is there was very little apparent support for the Nantucket Now position among the group. Kathy, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I agree. That's exactly what I heard. And there were any number of folks that I've talked to since then that were in groups. None of us were in the same groups.
We were.
Yes, but I mean, none of the people I spoke with outside of here were in the same groups with other, so it was, I heard the same thing. There was we know this is part of the tourist economy. We know we need them. And, there was some talk about, it's not the same, or the commercial ones we don't like, although, like you said, it was a pretty vague description of what that meant to different people. So I think there's an awful lot of consensus that, to move forward as the working group, a lot more consensus than I thought. I really didn't. I was surprised to see that level. And maybe, I don't know, I have to assume that there were people of all viewpoints that were on those meetings, but I didn't hear anything that was, overly negative or overly restrictive. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. And just as an aside, I listened in, there's two other things happening that just to share information. There is one of the Copley Group properties in Monomoy is the subject of a zoning board of appeals thing that I listened to the other day. And interestingly, that one, obviously it's owned by a company, but the zoning board still upheld their same reasoning, being that it is not a commercial use because the house is being used for people to live in. It's not being a bakery or a restaurant. It's still being used for people to live in. And the complaints were all noise and nuisance complaints that the town apparently, or the police, are not really doing anything about. So I think the real issue that most people, if they are concerned, are the noise and nuisance complaints. And it's a concern of mine anyway, that now that we have new regulations that went into place to fine people for noise issues in short-term rentals, as well as perhaps take away your registration to do so, that they're still not going to enforce that. And that's I think we need, as one of the things that would be nice to do from this group is to say, hey, enforce the laws you have and enforce the new ones. Otherwise, this problem is going to not go away. If you remember when there were all those huge parties on the 4th of July and big rowdiness and beer cans everywhere, and the police put a foot down on, got the state police involved and really made a message that, no, this is not okay, then it kind of calmed down. So maybe they need to do that. I would think that would be a thing. And then one other point was there's also the fractional ownership Picasso that we've talked about before. That has been brought to the zoning board as well by neighbors, and the zoning board, so it's being appealed, but their ruling was that was not permitted because it is a timeshare. It's the same thing as a timeshare, and timeshares are not permitted by zoning. So that's a different thing that's out there. So those are just two things to share.
I might add just as to what Kathy was saying with regard to the matter with regard to Monomoy. I thought it was interesting, for those of you who didn't listen in, that one of the neighbors who was complaining the most also has an STR, and he rents out. His complaint was noise. He was upset because apparently his 88-year-old mother's birthday party was somehow disturbed. and that on occasion there was a bachelor party there. But again, it doesn't sound like it's, just because there needs to be more enforcement of the noise. I agree with Kathy, there needs to be more enforcement of the noise, but it doesn't occur every time. In other words, people, one of the things that the SDR folks said in these small groups, where they were careful to whom they rented. They often rented the same families over and over and over again. They knew who they were. And, there's sort of a tradition there. Maybe that's sort of the influence on the people who are from Nantucket versus those arguably who are the big box people who don't, who don't do the proper vetting. But again, it doesn't seem to be the problem, the problem that Nantucket now is making it out to be.
Let me go ahead, Gary.
One thing that Kathy said about enforcement, I don't think you have it quite right, Kathy. I mean, what I heard from Roberto, who's in charge of that whole licensing thing, is that they are going to enforce it, but they're going to be very easy this first year because people are first starting to register, get to understand what permitted and not permitted. And so everything I've heard him say publicly is that you're going to give people a break this first year unless they're really obnoxious. But then after that, people will know what's expected and they'll do the proper enforcement. And so hopefully that was one of the big issues that should go away now that we have that Article 39 in full operation. By the way, I don't even know if it's started yet, right? January 23 before it's even starting. So but
Postponed.
postponed again. Yeah.
They're not ready.
Yeah. Well, they lost somebody. They're waiting for someone.
Yeah, no, I agree, Gary. It's just, I'm concerned that in the long term, because the town doesn't seem to have a good record of enforcement in general. And I just hope this doesn't go down that same path. That's really all I'm saying.
Well, let's think about it though for a second. The priority here, do you want your police spending their hours, responding to these kinds of calls, or do you want them responding to, traffic accidents or what have you? I mean, obviously everybody's concerned about the noise. I'm wondering whether one of the things we might, again, it's not immediate, but one of the things we might try to encourage, and I think Kathy, your group was part of this, is to work with the local realtors and make sure that when people come to rent, they have in their package, very clear and upfront are sort of the rules of the game, and that it's very clear that on the noise issues, and that they will be enforced and what have you, and that if you do it, you're not coming back, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I have in my listing, because actually it's a requirement once you register, you have to have the noise bylaw in there, and you have to have the outdoor lighting bylaw, so people are aware of it. And what I put in my listing is like, if I get fined because you violated these, this fine is coming out of your pocket, not mine. So it's part of the lease. It's part of, so I think that the real estate agents, some of them have picked up and are doing the same thing. So hopefully that'll help.
Ralph, did you have a comment?
Yes, for Peter Kahn. At the meeting, was there any discussion or support for the idea that was just expressed in a letter to the editor of Nantucket Current? And the point was there should be a sharp dividing line, say 50%. If it's more than 50% of the time of the year that it's leased on short-term rentals, then it sounds like a business and a corporate. If it's less than 50%, then it's ordinary families supporting their maintenance costs. Was there any discussion about making it a simple dividing line like that?
No, well, there at the December 12th meeting, again, Kathy, I rely on you to correct me here. At least in the groups, I didn't hear a lot of that. There was, I think what you're referring to, Ralph, if I understand your question, is a proposal that was to go to town meeting from a woman on island who had proposed this, and it was turned down by the town selectmen. The idea being that you had to be in residence, as you say, a majority of the time, so that if you couldn't lease your house out for more time than you actually spent on the island, and that was turned down. Now it was turned down, I think, because all such proposals were turned down to allow the STR committee to put forward its proposal. What you're suggesting was supported by ACT Now, but there's a feeling, you know, I mean, and I, you know, and it's certainly an issue as to, you know, do we need bright lines here? As to, you know, would a bright line be a certain amount of time that you had to be in residence before you could rent or not? I think that would be a bit controversial. Kathy, what I'm not an STR renter or rentor, so.
I think, I mean, town council found some, potential legal issues with it, but you're right. I think that the select board and the FinCom are going to recommend voting against all of them only because they want to let the short-term rental group come up with the solution and have that in the fall town meeting. But back to the original question, Ralph, I think there's a couple of things. One is, interestingly, right now, instead of what most zoning or what most towns have in their laws say that your home is considered owner occupied if you spend 6 months in your home. In Nantucket, it actually is defined as 3 months. So already the town is acknowledging that there are seasonal people, and they shouldn't be considered in the same light. But this particular, so one of the things that the bylaw you're talking about that's been proposed is it brings it up to 6 months again for the definition of short-term rentals. So now it's a 6 month to be owner occupied. The problem with that right now, I believe, is about 5% of the short-term rentals that are operated would meet that criteria. So the rest of the 95% of the available places to stay when you visit Nantucket would be a struggle. So if you only spent 2 weeks on the island, you could only rent for 2 weeks. If you only spent a month, you could only rent for a month. And one of the outcomes of that is that you would force anybody who's still able to rent they would want to rent only in the summertime, because that's when there's more money. It would force all of the rentals into the period which is already very busy, and the shoulder seasons wouldn't have availability anymore for people to rent, because you would have used up your allotment before then. So that's one of the problems with it. And then the other problem is there are many homes like in Sconset or on Old North Wharf or just on people's properties that are not year-round livable. They're just summer cottages. They're not heated. And so nobody can live in that particular home. So they wouldn't be allowed to be rented anymore either. So there's a lot of nuances there that, unless you really dig underneath the covers, that would cause people problems. So that's one of the other concerns with that.
But I think there is, it's something that we need to think about, because as far as a bright line, without bright lines, people are going to, people are going to not understand what they can and they can't do. Should we be able to draw bright lines here? And I think at some point, how do you distinguish between what is commercial? That is really at the heart of much of this. What is commercial?
Yeah, I think that line, if it can be drawn, and one of the things that we discussed, and I don't know if it was probably not at the public input meeting, but on our own meeting that we had before that, where one of the members brought up the definition of a real person that some other towns have done, which is saying that the owner needs to be a real person. It can't be, if it's an LLC, behind the LLC, it has to be a real person, a real family, not a corporation. So there was a way to define those terms in a way that might fit what Nantucket appears to be looking for based on the things we heard in the public input meeting. So that was another possibility that we haven't had a chance to discuss because we haven't met in almost 8 weeks. So
Donna?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think another criteria would be how many STRs one owns. I mean, if you own two's fine, 3 maybe, but if you're owning 4, 5, 6, and 7, that obviously falls into more commercial or enterprise. It
Right,
obviously is not
one
a
of the other-
Nantucket tradition.
one of the other policy levers, and I don't know if it's got any discussion, was there is an additional tax that's part of the legislation that can be levied on anybody who owns, I don't know what the number is, but if it's more than X, then there's an additional tax that goes on, and that tax goes directly into a community impact fund. So that's another thing that the working group might consider. Right now, I think there are maybe 75 or 80 properties that would fit that category of more than X properties by the same owner. So there's not a ton of them, but there are some.
If Gary,
Yeah, I think there are a lot of locals that have several rentals, short-term rentals, and many of them feel that in order to be able to stay on the island, they really need to have those. Some are summer uses only, others may not be, but I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of locals that have far more than one short-term rental property. So I'm not sure that would get a good hearing at the meeting. By the way, I have a thought that I've been thinking about. Our committee has not yet taken a official position on the STR stuff. We're on the committee. And one of my thoughts is that perhaps at this meeting or at some before the annual town meeting, I think that our committee ought to take a position as follows. We ought to take the position that we are glad to see the working group moving along. We are glad to see that the working group has recommended that there be a special town meeting in the fall to resolve this matter in the proper timing. And accordingly, this committee should be recommending to the select board that we are against any of the proposals, the warrants, the articles that are coming up on this current warrant that intend to change anything in this area between now and that fall town meeting. Because right now there's a handful of proposals. Instead of getting into each one of them, I think we ought to come out as a committee and say, we think the committee is doing what it's supposed to be doing. We think that the select board of support that only once the committee, the STR committee gets done, should there be a proper vote, and we should not support any of the other temporary short-term proposals.
okay, Bill,
Well, I was wondering, what would the expectation of that recommendation to the Board of Selectmen be? What could the Board of Selectmen do that would be responsive to that recommendation?
Well, they could speak to it at the meeting, when they ask for comments. They might publish something or they might speak to it at the meeting.
I see, thank you.
yeah, I guess.
Would support their current
Hold on,
position.
hold on.
Sorry,
I have a question of Bill. Because I think that was a very good question, Bill. And so my question is the following. Who is it? How does a fall additional annual town meeting get put on the calendar? Is that a select board item or does it go on some other way?
The select board votes to create a special town meeting in the fall if they wish.
So then if we were to adopt Gary's idea, the advice would be to support select boards calling a fall town meeting to consider this thing rather than, vote on things that are currently on the warrant, the current warrant proposals.
I suppose that there's also the element of saying, if there is a special town meeting and the warrant for that is opened, our preference would be that the select board indicate its preference for the committee's output to be favored rather than the individual warrant articles coming from citizens.
So let me just, before anybody else goes, I think that I think what Gary has put forward could be put forward in the as a motion, and that we can then debate that motion. But before we do that, I would like to discuss a little bit more about where the Strog is, because and I would say that if Gary makes such a motion, I would not support saying we're against any of the current warrant articles, but rather I think what we would be more appropriate to say, maybe with some elaboration, would be that we are for preserving the status quo until the Strog votes. And that status quo would include, what the Board of Zoning Appeals decided, I think, for the third time this week, and so on and so forth. I think we don't need to be for or against other things, only we need to be for the Strog doing its mandated duty. Peter. Yeah,
I guess,
sorry.
I don't know. I mean, I think ultimately we should probably take a position, but I think it's a little premature. Number one, what I'd like to hear, and somebody needs to find out, is exactly where the town select board is. I mean, there's, certainly if you read the papers, it sounds like they've already at least unofficially decided their position. But we need, number one, let's find out what, have they, is there an official position? If not, when will they, when will that be? And we should, assuming there is not an official position yet, we should weigh in just before they have to make that decision. And as you say, I think the status quo. I would not. Someone, I think, maybe someone mentioned the idea that we would take the position that we would simply tell them that we would favor the selectmen's position come for the special meeting. That's, who knows? That's a long way between now and then, and I would wait again closer to the special meeting to weigh in on a specific position as to that. So there are really it seems to be two issues. One, to support the select board if they're going to take a position on this May meeting, and then a separate issue, which again, no rush, but on the special meeting.
Okay, Bill.
Procedurally, if we're going to have discussion, wouldn't it be preferable to have Gary's motion put in front of us and seconded, and then discussion?
But I'm not discussing the motion. I mean, I hear you, Bill, but I'm not having discussion on the motion per se. It's really on the timing issue as to when we're going to know what the selectmen's position is.
So my question then is this something that needs action by us today, or can it go? So I'm saying so that somebody, we could sort of not have the motion today and then bring it up at a later date. But that's up to you all, because somebody can make a motion, any motion they want. But before we go there, and let me just ask a couple of questions about what Kathy and Peter have said. Let me just get my notes here. Enforcement. I think that's one of the big issues, and the problem in the past with noise, certainly, and perhaps dark sky the same, is that there really is no budget for enforcing these things on Nantucket. And when we went through this whole noise ordinance review 3 years ago now, 2 years ago, I don't know, my impression from the deputy chief, who really railroaded through a weakening of the noise ordinances, it seems to me, was that, the police department didn't really want to be involved in domestic disputes between neighbors, which is what these noise ordinances become. And I don't think it's up to the police department to decide those sorts of things, but I do think that there's a practical issue of money for enforcement, and then who enforces? Is it police department? Is it the Does the Board of Public Health need a couple of employees who can enforce these things, who are properly trained to enforce them? And that goes back to the registration issue and the fee for registering to have a short-term rental on Nantucket. And as I recall, town council's off-the-cuff advice to Strog on fees or to the select board on fees was that the fee can only be high enough to cover the costs of registration and so on. And so I'm wondering whether sort of going backwards, you can't, if you can't enforce rules, you don't have rules, right? That we should maybe talk with Roberto, because he seems to be the person who's going to be the chief administrator of short-term rentals, as to what his views on enforcement are, who's going to do it, and do they have the money to do it, and then advocate for fees that will cover a reasonable amount of enforcement. Secondly, I think that these noise ordinances are almost worthless in my view. They don't have enough definition. We fought this fight once, but I think there's a new opportunity to look at noise. And again, when you're talking about enforcement, you then say, okay, Roberto says either my guys can enforce it or I have no, or the police have to enforce it. We have to have whoever is supposed to enforce it look at these darn regulations and say, okay, what is it that you can enforce? And what needs to be improved about the noise regulations, which I really think is kind of a Strog issue. It seems to me if the Strog is going to have a whole regulatory regime, and the real problem seems to be noise and annoyance, is there any other problem that, there's overcrowding, which is a separate issue, but in terms of noise, Strog would not be doing its full duty, it seems to me, just to say, okay, we've solved the problem. There's going to be enforcement of the noise regulations, and yet the noise regulations will not handle the noise situation. So those are my personal views on what Strog needs to eventually get. I just want one more thing. It would be nice to know on this data collection, because it's also, I think it's hard for us in principle, to take a position if our position has always been that we need more data and the data is not there. And so I'd be interested to know, and I guess then our next meeting is our next meeting soon enough to discuss this data request situation, or do we really need to discuss that today?
Well, it's not going, my understanding is that this is not going to come before the STR group until the 31st. So arguably, if assuming we meet on the 28th, which would be the 2 weeks from today, that would give us time.
Okay. Okay, good. Gene?
I'm kind of confused about all this. A few things. Is the main reason people are against short-term rentals the noise factor that rental housing occupants create versus the unit owner? Or are there other reasons people are against short-term rentals? Because my experience, I live in town and it's noisy. On Fast Street, we've had the house next door was rented by the family that owned it for many years. A diagonal house, 3 doors down from us, is owned by the Copley Group, and previously was owned by another multi-unit owner. And well, if the group were renting, the renters came home at 1 o'clock from the bars, there is an ordinance, I think, that says that after 11 o'clock, 11, you have to, there's a quiet period from 11 to 7 or whatever it is. And if they were too noisy, I'd call the police and the police would come over and they'd be quiet. Sometimes the police took a half hour to come over, sometimes an hour to come over, sometimes 5 minutes to come over, but they inevitably eventually came over. They said something to the occupants quieted down, and the occupants also knew that during the rest of their stay, they were likely to be potentially given a ticket or whatever form of response the police could give for violating that ordinance. So are there other things? Because it almost feels to me like we're making a mountain out of a molehill. And my experience on Fair Street speaks to, I mean, now probably four houses within 100 feet of us are rented, oftentimes much of the season. So, and we don't have any problems. So I guess that's what confuses me. My experience confuses me as to whether there are other reasons that people are against short-term rentals.
Don, I think we haven't heard from you yet today.
Unmute yourself, Don.
You're on mute, Don.
All right, there was a phone ringing in my house, so I had to mute it. I would say two things. One's to answer Jean's question. Affordable housing was in the mix of this discussion also. That if property was being used for short-term rentals, it was crowding out people who lived year-round on the island, provided services, but not earning the kind of salary that could sustain them. So that was sort of a backdoor way of discussing that issue. Isn't that right, Kathy?
That was the original. That was the original case that was being made, and so part of the data that has been asked for is to find out if there is a linkage there and to what extent the linkage is there.
And I think that's the most important part. For everything else about noise and annoyance, whether you're here year-round or you're only renting for a short time, the same laws should apply. The other thing is, what my preference would be is to show some confidence in the procedure, what is going on, without stating a position one way or the other, that you're supporting the committee's work, and hopefully they will come up with a solution that will please most, would sit well with everyone, both seasonal people and people here year-round. So,
Gary.
I think Don is absolutely right in answering Jane's question. What's interesting to me is that the whole concern that short-term rentals was really making affordable housing so difficult has suddenly become a much, much lesser discussed issue. I mean, the economics are such that nothing's going to change what happens. People are going to sell their property to get the most out of it. And so that's why we are now focused more on the noise and disturbance issues. And Peter, to your point, I just want to remind you of that famous saying, perfect is the enemy of the good, okay? We have Section 39. It gives Roberto powers to withdraw registration. That's all he really needs. You don't have to have very bright lines. But people know that if there's too many calls to the police or to the Board of Health, eventually they may lose the ability to do the short-term rentals. So I don't think we have to get too much finite detail. And my third comment is based on at what point in time should our committee make some comment? My view would be the sooner, the better. That is, at least start suggesting to the select board that, we really are impressed with the fact that the short-term working group is getting there slowly, methodically, and therefore the status quo ought to be maintained until that meeting in the fall, the special town meeting. And the sooner we keep getting that message to the public and also to the select board, it'll just maybe get more people thinking, yeah, that really makes sense. In the meantime, all of these people with these short-term solutions are going to keep offering them as well. And we should avoid that.
So Don, I'm sorry, I may have cut you off by recognizing Gary before you were actually finished.
Well, I just wanted to say, that I think more being in favor of a process doesn't put us in any difficulty with other groups who might not like what we were saying or not fitting their agenda. And Kathy knows very well what I mean. So using the inquire and mirror for other issues other than this one might be.
Yeah. So Gene, I think this is now appearing to me in response to your question like a three-legged stool. I think noise, affordability of housing for people. And I think the third leg is just, congestion, what I'll call congestion. That there is, I think, a sense that the island just, it can't handle the crush during a significant portion of the summertime. As you all know, we've been in favor of improving some of the streets and roundabouts and whatever, and that's been voted down by a small group of people at town meetings, not to spend the money and what have you. But I think those are the three things in my mind. So Peter?
I think it's actually a table as opposed to a stool, because I think there is a fourth. And that's this sort of this nebulous position that outside corporations need to be dealt with and need to be prohibited, and because of the Nantucket, it's not the Nantucket way. Again, these sort of general vague positions, but that is a big driving force here, and that is going to clearly be, I think, Kathy, is going to be addressed by the STR at some point, in some manner of speaking.
But that's the boogeyman in virtually every conflict in the world. It's always the outsiders that are causing all the problems that are actually being caused by lots of people in addition to the outsiders. So, Kathy.
I just had a question. First of all, if you could, that article that you sent out, the New York Times one, I can't read it. So if there's a way you could send it to me in a format I could read, because I don't have a time subscription. That's just a question.
Kathy, you can.
I have what?
Kathy, you can Google it. If you Google it, you can. I printed it out. Put the article in Google, and it'll come up on your screen, and you can print it out.
Okay.
Peter, you should send
So
it to everybody.
my real question though is procedural, and maybe Bill Sherman can help with this. So my understanding right now is the citizens warrant articles, all of them that are out there now, go to town meeting in May, period, end of sentence. And there's no way to move them to the fall meeting. So I'm guessing that they could be tabled perhaps by their submitter, but it's my understanding that there's really no way to move them so that all the short-term rental articles could be discussed in the fall. Is that correct?
I believe so. I
Okay.
believe that they have to be taken one by one, and the recommendation of the Finance Committee could be to do just what you say. And but it'd be up to the individuals whether they want to resubmit for a special town meeting.
I see. Okay. Because I think that's one of the interesting parts about all of this is procedurally how that'll work. And I know that I mean, the hard part about estimating when the select board's going to make their decision is you just don't know. They could do it at any meeting they choose to. So waiting is kind of risky in that we won't get our input to them.
Wouldn't it show up as an agenda item?
It's on the agenda. Every single select board meeting is discuss the citizens warrant articles, and they're not listed. So it depends on what they feel like talking about. That's what's, it's an unknown.
Are we sure they have not already made the decision? I mean, they have discussed it. It's been reported in the press.
Yes,
And-
well, as far as having a fall meeting, they're definitely going to do that. They're already in discussion because one of the things the short-term rental group asked is when's it going to be? Because we want to be able to plan our work to make sure we're done in time. And so they are actually considering dates right now. I cannot imagine it would be before October 1st because the town is just too busy to have people come to town meeting. It's everyone's working their butts off still in September. So I can't imagine it will be before then, but they haven't picked the dates. And I'm thinking they may be picking them in the next 2 weeks because that was one of the reasons for postponing our 17th January meeting, was to give the town time to come up with dates. So that's a guess.
That's why I say the sooner, the better.
Be better.
Well, under that rubric, the sooner and better, it is the 28th soon enough.
Sure.
And because I think what we ought to do is wrap up this portion of our meeting and revisit, Gary, your non-motion motion on the 28th with more information and be able to discuss the data issues and whatever else happens between now and the 28th. So if that's, seems to be good, maybe we can move on to the citizen warrant discussion. Yeah, Peter?
Can I think it's good, but can I suggest, just going back to this, not everyone has seen the New York Times article that was being referenced. For those of us who have seen it, I think it's worthy of this whole group seeing it, and I can just quickly, and we can just paste it in, Kathy, you can get it to you, can just paste it into an email. And I can summarize it for everybody, but Peter found this is 30 years ago now. I think it's 1992. We're there, but sometime in the 1990s, New York Times was reporting about people on Nantucket complaining about how crowded it's getting and how the housing prices are going out of sight. And, so it's deja vu all over again. And it's something I think, ultimately the STR group needs to be reminded of. The study group needs to be reminded of that this is not some new issue that we're, and that there's not necessarily some big solution out there that has to be handled. This is a perennial problem, and it's really an issue, as we've discussed before, about just general overcrowding during the height of the summer months.
Yeah, I found the article kind of amusing, and I can't remember even what I was doing when I found it. But it's, ever since I started, ever since I bought on Nantucket, which is about 15 years ago, it's been all the same thing. Everybody wants to be the last guy in the door before the door shuts. Somehow things keep growing, but it's an island. At some point it reaches some sort of limit, and who knows when. But anyway,
Drinking island too.
yeah. If somebody can, I will look it up, and I can always print it out. I guess scan it, send it to Kathy. My one concern, and I'd be interested in some legal counsel from the rest of you, is again our public meeting requirements. And so I end up sending little pieces of this and that out to less than the whole group. But we're not really acting on this stuff. It's just information, and that I think might be of interest to people who seem to have a common interest in the island. And so I am happy to circulate this further under the belief that there is no public meeting law, issue with doing that.
Well, our minutes are posted. We can always attach it to our minutes too. So I mean, I don't think it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Peter, as long as there's no deliberation on it, if you send it out and people start writing back and forth, that's a deliberation. You just send it out and say, don't write to me, and certainly don't write to all. You'll be okay.
Yeah. So,
Peter,
yeah,
in this deliberation about, we've always been concerned about overcrowding. It's almost like an obsession of the island. I like to remind myself, I'm a city boy. I've always lived in congested places. I've never been in a place where half of all the land is owned in perpetuity by a land bank and can't be built upon. So it's rather amazing. That's an opposite point of view about congestion.
I guess you've never been in Alaska, in Nevada, where the federal government owns most of those places. Yeah, yeah. Great. Go ahead, Pamela.
Just because. the
Yeah, I
federal
just had a
government-
quick comment. I've been involved with this a little bit from the beginning with Kathy's group. And when I was in those groups, Peter, that you and Donna were in a few weeks ago, and Kathy, one of the remarkable things that came out of one of the groups I was in is this feeling that we're rushing to do something and we really haven't defined the problem. We've figured out that short-term rentals are not taking away from affordable housing. So we're like, they're grasping at straws for what the problems really are. The noise data doesn't even support that short-term rentals are the biggest problem with noise on the island. So, one of the things that came out of the group I was talking with was, are we just registering and replicating what the state's already done with no real intent to change anything on Nantucket? The island is already getting a ton of revenue from the state tax, implication. And, we're a little bit like reinventing the wheel with no purpose. So I really think it's great that the short-term rental work group continue, because I kind of feel like they're not really clear what problems they're trying to solve. And that's what's kind of frustrating.
Well, yeah. And I think what you're seeing, we've in our position, our position, the ACNVT position has been from the outset to find the problem, but we unfortunately haven't made a lot of headway. My feeling, again, just personally, as I look at this, again, Kathy can weigh on this. We are dealing with a well-financed, professional Act Now group. I mean, they've got a paid director. No one else involved has somebody on the payroll. And so we're ending up shooting, so they put up some argument, whether it's initially it was affordable housing, then it's noise, it's going to be something else, and we end up we're spending our time shooting those down, and we'll eventually come to a consensus. I'm hopeful, as Kathy is, that by the group having seen the reactions on December 12th, we now recognize that we have a consensus among ourselves without having to worry about Act Now, right? We can, but thus far it's been basically, countering their position, which is not a good place to be, to tell you the truth.
I have a question. I'm a new member and I'm learning a lot about what's going on legally on Nantucket. What is our raison d'etre as a committee? I mean, are we going to be getting involved in other issues, or is this our main purpose?
The raison d'etre is spelled out in the bylaw that creates the committee, which is on the website, and I haven't memorized it. But in general, we are a creature of the select board. We're a committee appointed under delegated authority by the town manager, delegated from the select board,
Right.
to provide advice to the select board on issues of concern to non-voting taxpayers. And I think it's basically that's all we've done. I've been on this a number of years now, and I think Bill has been on far longer than I have been, and maybe Don as well. And Gary, I think we probably started around the same time. But we have from time to time provided in short written form a decision containing advice to the select board. And at times we've, gone a little bit further and provided the same advice to the FinCom, which has a great role in the uptick of the legislation. And under the bylaw, we are also permitted to address the town meeting regarding non-voting taxpayers' concerns with citizen warrant articles. So I think that pretty well spells it. It's a very broad, I won't call it a mandate, but we have jurisdiction over nothing and over everything, sort of that way. And it's maybe the second or third best thing to us actually having a vote at the town meeting, which is not possible.
Peter, I read that on the web before I
Yeah.
became interested in the committee. But I'm wondering, moving forward, I mean, yes, the STR is one issue, and it seems to be top of mind. And I agree with a lot of what the members are saying. We don't know where we're going with this yet. And also from what you were saying, there are a number of laws, if you will, on the books already that aren't even being enforced to kind of alleviate some of the issues that have been raised with regard to the STRs. But I'm wondering, moving forward, what kind of, and I think Kathy, perhaps you could address it, what other things are we going to be looking at besides STRs?
All of the citizen warrant articles, anything that goes on the warrant. And I think Peter was trying to move us on to start talking about some of the other ones.
Wonderful.
And that's, we consider all of them as far as they have an impact on non-voting taxpayers. So it's not every single one of them. I think that maybe answers. Nope.
Yes, thank you.
But
Right.
one of the benefits of being on this committee is, any person on this committee can raise an issue and bring it to the attention of the committee. If it's, obviously you want to raise issues that are of concern to quote unquote non-voting taxpayers. It doesn't necessarily have to be a warrant issue. We've done, we've dealt with, we've talked about, traffic conditions, right? We've talked about night sky issue. I mean, it's unlimited, and it's only really this time of year that we get into the warrants, and STR is sort of
It's a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just come up.
But to me, Donna, the most
Yes.
important issue that we should be focusing on once we get past the short-term rental issue is the fact that the form of government that we are using in Nantucket is so archaic and outmoded and so inappropriate
Yes.
for a $150 million budget every year. And, we participated with the Town Government Study Committee. We recommended that the Town Government Study Committee, be reinstituted. It is so preposterous every time I think about the fact that all of the rules and laws and the financial engagements that the town is involved in have to be resolved in one 8-hour meeting once a year is so
Yes.
preposterous. And so little by little, there's starting to be a movement by long-term residents of the town.
Yes. Yeah.
Time to change, and I think we should be a big supporter of that. And
I
so
agree
that's very
wholeheartedly.
big for our committee to support.
Thank you, Gary. I agree wholeheartedly. Yes. I hope we do focus on that too.
So that is the next subject, and it's on the agenda, which is discussion of warrant articles. We have in past meetings, I've been trying to find out from the members, what warrant articles they think are worthy of discussion here, and I've not heard back a lot, but so I suggested to Kathy that we send around the link to the town council comments on the, what are they, 27 or 31 some warrant articles, and sort of go over what it is we should be talking about. And I personally think the first there are two that I would like to focus on today. One is the form of government, which is, I think, Article 1 and or warrant 1 and number 6. I thought about inviting the proponents, but I really thought that it would be better to have a discussion before doing that rather than after doing that. And I also wanted some advice from Bill Sherman. Curtis Barnes, I think you know Curtis, and I sort of held off inviting him, but would he be a good person to have come and discuss this proposal?
I think he's a clear speaker and has grounds for his ideas. I think he would be a good guest speaker.
Okay, and then the other proponents, I guess it's a group of them, but is led by Jeff Carlson. But as I read the town council's comments, it was not clear to me that, and unfortunately I've printed them out, but they've been cut off here. It sounded like that Article 6 or warrant proposed 6, which is charter change, which was the very fulsome, an entire code provision for the articles, is somehow not in the proper form for this town meeting. And
If I remember correctly, it's because the change he seeks requires the legislative sanction, which is gained by either a I'm losing a recollection of it, but anyway, a town meeting vote for that change to be sent to the legislature, or by setting up a charter commission.
yeah, so is that something that can be considered by this town meeting, or is it really Curtis Barnes' proposal, which would sort of lead to that, it seems to me, that is most likely to be considered?
My understanding is that Curtis Barnes' article is in better shape for town meeting consideration.
So let's focus on
I
that.
understood that he went and he spent a considerable amount of time with town council to get it so that it was a possible thing to take place. I don't know if the other articles folks met with town council ahead of time. Not sure.
So then maybe what we should do for the next meeting, in addition to Strog, is ask Curtis to come speak about this. I don't know whether anybody else, but looking at his proposal and then also looking at what, Article number 6, what a bylaw or a state law would actually look like if you change the form of town government. It seemed to me that the one thing that is kind of missing for us is a role for non-voting taxpayers. And I would certainly want to see the continuation of this group in its present form or some other form, if the form of government were to change to a representative form, and even more sort of with the Bolshevik in me, a proposal that if, for example, if you had a select board of the same size as the current select board, perhaps there would be an additional select board member who would be elected by non-voting taxpayers. I don't think that would ever pass, but don't ask, you don't get. But there you, or even a non-voting member of the select board of that nature. The other sort of issue that I saw with Article 6 that is of concern to me is the notion that you were going to divide the town representation into, I think, existing geographic areas.
Yes.
And I worried about kind of one person, one vote issues from that, because it's not apparent to me. I have no idea where the population of Nantucket, how it lays out on a map. But it may be that some areas have very little representation, and some areas have an awful lot of representation if it's done that way. But those are things that pop out. And the last one, I think, for everybody to consider again, is it's not really Bolshevik, it's Australian. It's a requirement if one were to go to a representative form of government, a requirement that every registered voter actually vote. And you could have some sort of minor fine. I don't know, they pay an extra $15 in real estate taxes if they don't. That is the situation in Australia, as I understand it today. And the objective there is basically to solve the problem that we have in the current ATMs, where you can have a very small group of people voting something up or down, depending on where it is in the meeting. The idea is you cannot have really polarized groups controlling your legislature and your laws if everybody really has to vote. And so you're going to basically have a truer democracy. My last comment on all this is that I think that in a concern that developed during the study group phase was people thought they were losing something by losing the town meeting. And I think actually it's the other way around. They're gaining something by gaining a representative form of government. And the evidence, I think, is clear. If you look at the attendance of the annual town meeting, or you look at the voting, the total number of people who vote on each one of the warrant articles throughout the day of that town meeting, it pales in comparison to the number of people who actually come to the polls during the annual town elections. I think it's like 20% of the people who actually go to the polls. And so I think that the notion is that there is more democracy where people go to the polls and vote rather than have to show up at a town meeting. So those are my views on the town council form of government, which I'm strongly in favor of. Yeah, Bill.
Just in a moment of appreciation for annual town meeting, open town meeting, with the form that Curtis Barnes is proposing, the delineation of the precincts or the areas for representation is very difficult. There is the concern that town employees could dominate the representative town government because they're so numerous. And the other observation is that annual town meeting attracts far more voters than would there be representatives. On the other, so in a sense, one might summarize by saying that annual town meeting is democratic, representative town meeting is representative type of government. They're different.
Yeah, I understand I understand that, and you're absolutely correct that it's more direct to go to an annual town meeting, but it's also turns out to be quite a bit more tribal, I think, at that annual town meeting, and I think in place of the annual town meeting, it's really not in place because you have it today. Anybody can go to the select board and speak on any thing that is up for consideration. And I think in the Jeff Carlson warrant, there was the ability of people to basically have referenda on various items that they didn't like what the select board was doing with, if I'm not incorrect. So there's a way to get direct on items of very great public importance where there are enough people there. There's a way to get direct participation in the creation of the law rather than representative participation. But those are just my views. I'm interested in hearing others and eventually deciding whether we ought to support, not support, make some recommendations as to the Curtis Barnes proposal. Anybody have some views, Kathy?
I think the town needs to move to one of those. There are nuances I don't quite understand between them, and maybe that would, the speakers who are really like Curtis could really tell us what's the differences and help us with that. But I do think, I mean, yeah, it's not working. There's a whole bunch of money that gets left on the table when the federal government comes up with grants and you have to make a decision by a certain date. And we can't do that because town meeting hasn't happened. So there's an awful lot of things that are inefficient. And Nantucket's just too big to be in the form it is. So I think it needs to move somewhere. And I guess I don't have a position one way or the other on these, but I think we need to have somebody who understands it and has worked it and thought about it a lot, speak to us to help us do that.
Peter?
Yeah, I agree. I'm just curious, does Martha's Vineyard doesn't have a town meeting, doesn't it? What's their form of government?
They have they have like 6 towns.
They have 6 towns, yeah.
Well, yeah, well, okay. You call it a town. I mean, you could call it anything. I mean, you can call it regions too. I mean, we may not have towns, we have regions. I mean, it can be done.
They have towns, actually. They're structured differently than we are. So
The
they
towns
handle it
have their own
differently.
Town meeting?
I don't know if they have a town meeting.
I don't think so.
One,
Okay.
I don't know. They meet in their own groups from what I
Yeah.
remember.
Each town has their own set of officials in Martha's Vineyard, unlike Nantucket, where we only
Yeah.
have one group covering the
They're
whole line.
structured differently.
But Martha's Vineyard also has a county over those 6 town governments.
And Nantucket Select Board is also the county commission.
Yep.
It's the same people.
I assume that that not many communities, either in Massachusetts or even indeed the United States, have this form of the form of government we have.
No, it's not uncommon. Brookline has a town meeting, except because it's so large, it doesn't have, it has a representative town meeting. Each precinct has 15 town meeting members, and I think there's about 15 or 16 precincts. And the town meeting meets twice a year, usually for 2 nights. Then the operating portion of the government is a select board made up of 5 people and a town manager. So it's somewhat similar for a much larger, Brookline has about 60,000 people, and I don't know what its budget is, but it's probably $500 million or something. So the form of town meeting works in lots of other communities in Massachusetts. And there are some communities like Framingham, which switched from a town meeting form to an elected form where it has an elected mayor. And I'm not sure which form we're talking about here. I'm just not privy to it, but.
Also, I think that the select board actually, and we could probably find it and send a link out, had a meeting where they invited people from different towns that had moved off of a town meeting form of government to the various other choices that Massachusetts allows. And they said, here's what was good about it, here's what was bad about it, and explained the differences. So there was a really good discussion that I could look for and find and make available about what the differences are. Because I think the Massachusetts only allows like 4 or 5 different forms of government. You have to pick one of them. Is that right, Gary?
Yes, yes, we have been limited in the past. Now that our population has grown to over 15,000, we have a few more options. But previously, we didn't have all those options. We couldn't have a mayor, something like that. But as our town has grown, based on the latest census, we do have a few more options.
Yeah, so.
Kathy, would you, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Donna.
All right, Kathy, would it be possible, it'd be helpful if you could find that, I remember reading a little bit about that, but if you could find that article, it would be helpful, I think, if we all read it before Curtis comes to speak to us.
It's not
Not
an
an
article,
article.
it was a whole meeting, so you'd have to watch
Oh.
the YouTube.
And I
Okay, it's on
recommended,
YouTube?
Yeah, it's in the town, it's in the town's YouTube. I'd have to go look for it. Might take me a bit, but I'll look.
Oh, If
And
you, yeah, just give
send
us,
us around a link.
Yeah.
that's a good idea.
And maybe
That'd be
tell us
great.
what timestamp we should start looking.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
I saw that meeting, and I strongly recommend all of you to take the extra time to watch it, because here are 3 individuals who were in the old-fashioned meeting type that we had and who've changed their towns. And as Kathy said, there's some pluses, there's some minuses, but I think for the most part, there were pluses. But it's worth all of you seeing what they
Was
said.
that like in the fall, Gary? Do you remember around time frame so I can look?
It wasn't too long ago. It was several months, a few months ago,
Okay.
a few months ago.
Yeah,
It was select board meeting, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
It
okay.
was after September.
Okay.
So it's my understanding on the Kurt Barnes, which is, I think, warrant article 1, is it? It basically proposes a change that is really, the only change is instead of the annual town meeting being the legislative body, the select board becomes the legislative body and the members of the select board are chosen. The basic structure of the town stays the same with a town manager appointed by the select board and so on and so forth. So it's not dissimilar from the way things work now, excepting that the select board doesn't have all the authority now that it would have under this change. And Steve, I'm in another town up in Vermont where it's a town meeting form of town. It's sort of common in New England, I guess. But it's a little teeny town compared to Nantucket. Its budget would be a day's spend in Nantucket. So I will endeavor to get Kurt Barnes to join us on the 28th to discuss this further. I know, Bill, you've on many occasions talked about the imbalance in terms of town employees and not town employees, and that the tail being able to wag the dog. And I had not really thought about that when I was thinking about the one person, one vote situation in Curtis' proposal. But he'll be able to, I think, inform us better on the trade-offs.
Just a view raised during the initial town and county charter commission discussions with residents, but it doesn't end the subject. Just because it's a problem doesn't mean it can't be dealt with, but it is an important consideration.
Yeah. Okay, so then I think the only other article, because it's going to be up before FinCom, as I understand it, their next meeting, is the one relating to noise. And that one is, I'm trying to look, I had a note, but I lost it as to what the number of that one is. It's, oh,
Let me see-
Go ahead, yeah.
let me see if I can find it while you're
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah, I looked at this a month or so ago, and basically it's air conditioner noise. And changing the regulation from, you measure the noise, I think at 20 feet from the property line to.
It's 40 to 30.
Feet.
40 to 30.
Yeah, 40 to 30,
Yep,
or is it 30 to 20?
no, 40 to 30.
40 to 30. And I think that that probably makes a lot of sense, especially in the areas that have like R1 districts, where I think you have 5-foot side yard lines. And I know I'm in an R20, it's a 10-foot side yard lines. I think all that makes a lot of sense, especially in an era when we seem to be going, the next big environmental change is going to be to heat pumps. Because they're so terrifically more efficient than whatever we're using today. And so the heat pump will presumably be outside in the open air, and you'll be able to hear it. And the technology, I think, is there to, without buying the highest, most expensive pump or air conditioning involved, to keep the noise down. So I think it's something that we ought to support. Anything that cuts down on noise intrusion in a reasonable way is a good thing, in my view. I don't know.
Peter,
Article 9, and it's from 40 to 30 feet.
yeah. Peter, I don't agree with your position. On behalf of the seasonal taxpayers,
Yes,
I don't agree. I don't have any pools, by the way. But I just don't think that our constituency would be in favor of that. Because a lot of seasonal people have homes that do have pools, and they don't want to be told where they have to move the equipment. Eventually, all the equipment will be noise reduced anyway, as these laws continue to take effect. But I don't think we should be speaking for the total seasonal population, saying we want you to, move all your equipment around because a couple of people are complaining about it. That's my view.
okay, I guess I don't view this as being involving moving of any equipment. I
Yes,
think
it is.
it has to do with the noise that the equipment makes, and there are ways
Well, you got to move the equipment to reduce the noise.
there.
That's
there-
one possibility, but not the only.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I do have a pool, and we put our pool equipment in a revetment that protects our neighbors from hearing our pool equipment, and subjects us to our own noise. So it's easily done, and I understand you can also just put an enclosure around the equipment to cut down the noise, if there is a noise problem, and that enclosure would only need to go on one side, the side toward the property line. But those are my views, and I certainly think on new installations that this ought to be taken into account. But that's my view. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I would just say about heat pumps and the heat pump revolution. It is true, they are remarkably efficient now compared with 30 years ago. However, it's still true that heat pumps don't work so well above a certain mid-Atlantic latitude. The colder it is outside in Minnesota, the heat pumps just don't work.
Yeah, well, we're not in Minnesota. So the question is Nantucket.
Yeah.
It's for us today.
I had a condo in Lexington, Massachusetts, 40 years ago that had heat pumps. And obviously the technology was fairly new compared to what it is today, but nonetheless, it it worked fine. And a heat pump is nothing more than an air conditioner that also does heat, provides heat. So a lot of the, you know, and the reason it's becoming popular is because it uses electricity rather than natural gas or propane or oil or other offensive fuels.
Yeah, yeah. Bill Gardner.
Yes. I welcome everyone. I welcome everyone to come out to Quidnet on the coldest day in Nantucket's winter history and enjoy a nice heated room from our heat pump.
Are you there?
No, but we have friends living in the house.
What's your,
And they say it gets nice and toasty.
what's your electric bill?
Yeah.
It's $500 a month.
Yeah, I mean, we have heat pumps here in Washington and they work well, but they do draw a fair amount of electricity. So I mean, it's just a,
In Nantucket, we actually have geothermal, and that's surprisingly expensive to run as well, because the electricity is the most electricity, I think, in the world in Nantucket. But this is it's a noise issue, and are we going to support this? Is this prospective or is it retrospective? I don't have it in front of me.
If it's zoning, it would be, you'd be grandfathered, but if it's not a zoning, then it affects everybody day one. I believe that's the way it works.
Okay, what is the number?
9.
9?
9.
9.
I don't think it's considered a zoning law. The bylaw, the noise bylaw is not a zoning law, right?
Right.
So I guess it would take effect immediately and it would apply to everybody. I don't know if the wording has any kind of caveat in it.
Yeah. So the concern would be that a grandfathering concern that because I see this is chapter 10 something or other. Mine is cut off, unfortunately.
So maybe if it said, you know, any installation put in after the passage of this blah, 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 but it doesn't say that.
Yeah. So should we comment that way?
I don't think we should comment because it's not an issue for non-voting taxpayers,
Okay.
period.
right.
Very simple. Does anybody want to make a motion to comment one way or the other?
Yeah, I make a motion that we don't comment on it because it's not a concern to the non-voting taxpayer community.
Okay, is there a second?
Okay, I second.
Okay. We'd have the same effect if there were no second. There would be no comment. There's a motion, a second, not to comment. Any discussion?
I'm not, okay, I guess I'm a little unclear here as to why this is not an issue for non-voting taxpayers. We have this equipment. I mean, I don't have a pool, and I don't, but there are many non-voting taxpayers, obviously, who do or don't. I mean, I'm not sure why it is not an issue for the non-voting.
You hear- It's because nobody talks about it. I never heard anybody complaining about it. When you talk about what's the problems in Nantucket, they talk about parking, they talk about lack of being able to get food, lack of get reservations. There's a million things they talk about, but they never talk about that. No one really cares about it.
No, well, noise, we've talked about noise being an issue, and one of the big issues that we've talked about is noise from various outdoor sources. I mean, Peter, didn't we have this whole thing when Peter, when you were on this committee with the police? I mean, what was that all about?
Well, it was in part about this, but also if I did not talk about this over the last several years, I'd be remiss because I have this problem right where in my own house, where there is an air conditioner that is less than 10 feet from the property line next door, and it makes a racket. And it was the cheapest air conditioning ever devised. I'm basically, about 30 feet away from that. air conditioning. So I have experienced this personally. Maybe that disqualifies me under conflict of interest. But and you know, the same thing with the pool equipment next door. There was no thought put into keeping it quieter. But the lucky thing is, whenever his pool equipment malfunctions, I'm able to call him up and tell him he's got a problem that needs solving, and he gets it solved. Anyway, Ralph.
I just have a question for Gary.
Yep.
Is your point that noise is not a problem in general? Or is noise not specific to our own constituency?
Well, noise is an issue for me, and we try to fix the noise laws. What you're not familiar with is the fact that when I was chairman of this committee, we spent 2 years trying to fashion a change to the noise laws, which would prohibit excavation during the high season on weekends and Sundays and public holidays. And we lost that. We went to the town meeting and we actually lost that. So noise is a major concern of mine. But you know, when I think about this committee and how we should be making representations to the select board, I think we have to be careful not to get into some of these nitty-gritty issues, besides the fact that we don't really have too many details about what the decibel volume is of the old equipment or the new equipment, and what the engineers may say and what's going to happen on that. But I just don't think it rises to the occasion. I'd like this committee to be known for speaking for the non-voting taxpayers on really substantial issues, such as town government, such as discrimination against non-voting taxpayers. I haven't told, you know, Ralph talked about the land bank. If I got on my soapbox, I'd tell you that it's crazy that the land bank keeps taking property out of use and making all of the existing property twice as expensive for anyone to use. And there ought to be some limit as to how much more land bank can take property that is not being used for the public good. And I also think one of our issues is, why are non-voting taxpayers being treated discriminatorily in so many ways? I think about the discount given to residents for putting solar roofing on, but it's not being applied to seasonal residents. And to me, that's illegal. To me, that's a constitutional violation. So a lot of big issues.
I get it. So going back to your motion,
Yep.
your motion is really about, it's not something that rises in priority.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Absolutely. No.
Okay. Steve.
My question about noise, are we just talking about air conditioner noises and pool noises? What about lawn work and stuff like that? Maybe that's been covered, but I mean, I know in some communities they prohibit, and I think we did make a change from gas powered to electric a year or two ago. And also I question, I had different experience than Gene did a few years ago when we had incredible noise and the police do not come, you know, whenever you call them. And we have a shortage of police as well, I think. So, I mean, I think having them come to deal with a noise issue just doesn't happen.
That's why I have to call the sheriff instead.
I mean,
We did. Situation.
for me, this issue also is not an intermittent noise issue. It's one that the equipment's there and it just makes it, you know, whenever it turns on. But it is what it is. So you gonna call the question, or Don, did you have a comment? Saw you had your hand up before. No, okay. So go ahead.
I have a question. I gather this Warren article is specific as to just air conditioners. Is that right? Or is it as to all noise?
Kathy, could you read it? I don't have it in front of me, unfortunately.
Let me see if I have. the whole thing, or if I need to get, I was just looking at the comments.
Very short, yeah, as I recall.
Okay, here it is. It's 9. I have it here somewhere. Let me go down to it. Okay, I'm at 6. I'm almost there. Which one's this? It's 9. Bigger so I can see it. Let's see. That's 10. Let me read 9.
Mhm.
It says air conditioning and air handling equipment, pumps, fans, and compressors, sound level limit. Prohibited noises. No person shall operate or cause to be operated any air conditioning or air handling equipment, swimming pool or spa pump, or an exhaust fan in such a manner as to exceed 55 decibels over a 10-minute period of time, measured from a distance of 30, and they're changing it to 40 feet. So that's the only change in the existing bylaw, or 40 feet or more. So it's the existing bylaw from the source of the sound of the property line of the premises on which said activity is located at any time of the day or night. So the only change is going from 40 down to 30 feet.
All right. So I think, thank you. So I think it is, I mean, with all due respect to my longtime colleague on this committee, Gary Beller, I sat through obviously many years of discussion about noise, and we did lose, but noise has been an issue. And the only difference I see in this, as opposed to what we were dealing with before, is this is a component part of the noise, and this is just one, and we were dealing with noise more generally. I don't see this as in any way undercutting the fact that the ACMVT has long been known to be concerned about noise, and I would endorse this as a reason. It sounds like it's a reasonable position to be had, and it doesn't undercut. I don't think it in any way undercuts our general view on other matters. So I would support it.
So should we call the question, or does anybody want to? Does anybody have an amendment? Carries. Yeah, go ahead, Gene.
I just have a concern. We have no idea how this will affect our constituents. What percentage of the homes that are owned by our constituents would need to make changes to their air conditioning systems, or build barriers or whatever? And so I'm not, I don't think we should be voting on something and taking a position when we don't really know how it's going to affect our constituents. We should try to find that information out, and somebody in the town may actually be able to advise us, but I just think we're from what I've read, the committee is already known by some as not really representing the total constituency.
It's
And
only Monomoy.
well, it may be mostly Monomoy, but
I don't disagree. I'm all for getting more information. I don't think, and we have some time. So I Peter, maybe you can find those answers out.
I mean, we could.
I'll be glad to table the motion if we want to get more information.
Okay,
Yes,
okay,
good
we'll do
idea.
that. As I recall, I looked at this stuff when we last looked at it, and that this is a positive movement. It should be of concern probably only to people, whether they're resident or non-resident, in the like R1 and possibly the R2 district, because when you get into the places like Monomoy, presumably the air conditioning equipment is more than, it could be 100 feet from the property line. So it's basically part of the more densely populated parts of town, an issue. My recollection, and I'll support this after taking a look, is that this is still a pretty lenient standard. In other words, in the whenever anybody mentions decibels, everybody's eyes go blank because people really don't understand that. But I'll also supply kind of a little chart that explains what your experience would be if something if there's a 55 decibel sound source, although this would be a source greater than 55. It's 55 decibels is the issue here. Yeah, so it's basically whether something that creates a noise that is 55 decibels 30 feet from the property line, is it?
Right now, I don't, it's 40, it's now 40.
From where? The source or from the property line?
Go back, it says from a distance of 30 feet or more from the source of the sound or the property line.
Or the property line. So it's going to be probably more distance because
Whichever is greater, whichever
you
is
can't put
less.
this on the property line anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would
Okay.
just ask, how many of us carry around a decibel meter?
Only at restaurants.
Oh,
I don't carry it around, but I actually have one. We believe we
Why?
live next to Gary's club.
I'll withdraw my motion.
And whenever Gary is on the back terrace speaking, the decibel meter goes crazy.
All right, can we,
okay.
there's a motion to adjourn and getting close to being in order. 'Cause we're close to noon here.
So
Yeah.
next meeting will be the 28th, and we will, is there a motion to adjourn? And maybe we'll spend
moved.
just a couple of minutes at the beginning of the next meeting, because we'll have more sworn in members by then, reintroducing ourselves so everybody understands where everybody else is coming from.
Sounds good.
Great. Motion to adjourn, motion second.
Aye.
Harriet, thank you very much. It's been an enjoyable meeting.
Stay
So-
safe, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank
Thanks.
you.